Before I dive into this story, I want to ask you something, my dear friends. Where are you watching from right now? Are you curled up at home in your living room? Or maybe sneaking a quiet moment during your day? And tell me, what's the weather like outside your window? Because sometimes the way the sky looks matches perfectly with the kind of story you're about to hear. Now let me begin. My name is Eleanor. I'm 63 years old, and for more than 4 decades, I've shared my life with my husband, Richard. Together, we've built a quiet existence in our little suburban town, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names and whispers of gossip travel faster than the wind on a stormy night. Richard has worked faithfully at a large manufacturing company just outside the city. Over the years, I've shaken hands with some of his colleagues at company gatherings, smiled politely at holiday dinners, but his professional world always felt distant, separate from ours. That was until one rainy Thursday afternoon, when I was unexpectedly drawn into it. It happened so simply. Richard had forgotten some important documents on the kitchen counter, and I, being the dutiful wife I'd always been, drove them into the city. His company's headquarters looked every bit as modern and polished as you'd expect. Glass walls, gleaming stone floors, and the rich aroma of coffee drifting lazily from the break room near the entrance. My heels tapped softly on the shiny tiles, blending with the low hum of printers and muffled voices behind office doors. The receptionist, a young woman with a neat bun and bright smile, recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Clark?" she said warmly. But before I could ask for Richard, her expression shifted as she glanced at her screen. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore would like to see you." "He said it's important." I froze for a moment. Mr. Whitmore, Richard's boss. A tall man in his early 60s, dignified with the kind of calm presence that made every word he spoke carry weight. I'd only met him briefly before, but his reputation was one of quiet authority and impeccable composure. Why would he want to see me? Still, curiosity nudged me forward. I followed the directions down the hall, my footsteps hushed by the thick carpet. The faint office buzz faded into silence until I reached his door, which was slightly ajar. I knocked gently. "Come in, Eleanor," his voice called, deep and measured. The first thing that struck me when I entered was how different his office felt from the rest of the building. Rich wooden walls, the subtle scent of leather and sandalwood, and a bookshelf lined with neatly arranged volumes and framed photographs that I didn't dare study too closely. He rose to greet me, his smile courteous, yet strangely personal. I placed Richard's documents on his desk, ready to excuse myself, but then he quietly walked to the door, clicked the lock, and returned to his chair. My breath caught, not out of fear, but because the gesture shifted the air between us. The atmosphere suddenly felt heavier charged. His posture remained composed, his voice calm, but that simple action told me this conversation was meant to be private secret. "I wanted to speak with you alone." He began softly, folding his hands. "It's about Richard, and something I believe you deserve to know." A chill traced down my spine. My mind spun wildly, with possibilities, none of them comforting. His eyes didn't waver. They weren't stern now, but almost tender, filled with something like concern. I've watched Richard for many years, he continued. And I've also seen the toll it's been taking on him. I don't think you realize how much has been hidden from you. I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else. Outside, the rain tapped against the tall windows, each drop like a drumbeat, sinking with the heavy thud of my heart. I leaned forward, without realizing it, bracing myself for words that I sensed could change everything. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air warmer, almost as if the walls themselves were leaning closer, eager to catch every word. I sat frozen, torn between apprehension and something I didn't fully recognize, an awareness that this moment would shift everything. I thought I knew not only about my husband Richard, but maybe about myself. My fingers curled tightly over the armrests of the chair, grounding me as Mr. Whitmore's voice cut through the quiet. His tone was calm, deliberate, but each word landed like a stone in my chest. Richard has been under enormous pressure these past 2 years, he said evenly. Not just from the workload, but from the battles within upper management. Things he hasn't told you. A frown tugged at my lips as memories collided, unfinished dinners, late nights when his chair stayed empty, the way his shoulders seemed to sag when he thought I wasn't watching. I'd noticed these fragments before, but hearing them framed this way, it unsettled me. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked, my voice tighter than I intended. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished desk, the leather chair creaking softly. His eyes, usually so authoritative, softened because I've seen something else. He's pulling away, not only from work, from friends, but perhaps even from you. And Eleanor, his voice lowered, almost tenderly. You might be the only person who can still reach him. Something inside me stirred defensiveness. Yes, but also a sharp curiosity. An ache I hadn't realized I carried. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the glass in steady rhythm, echoing the pounding of my own heart. I glanced toward the window, hoping the storm could steady me. Perhaps sensing my hesitation, his voice shifted slower, more intimate. I've worked with many people in my career, but your husband, he carries more than he should. He hides it well. And that can be dangerous, dangerous. The word lingered in the air, too heavy to ignore. Did he mean for Richard's health, his career, or something else? I wasn't ready to imagine. I've debated for weeks whether to speak to you directly, Mr. Whitmore continued. But when I saw your name on the visitor's log this morning, I knew I couldn't wait. His words flowed unhurried, yet deliberate, pulling me deeper. I found myself noticing the small things, the way his hand gestured, just slightly, when he emphasized a thought, the way his voice lowered when he said my name. There was a quiet intimacy forming, one that wasn't about closeness of bodies, but about the weight of secrets we were now sharing. I'm not asking you to confront him, he said gently. Sometimes the most powerful thing is simply being there, reminding him that he's not as alone as he feels. You might be the one person who can help him break through the walls he's built. The words pierced me. My mind drifted to all those quiet dinners, to every time Richard had smiled with that practiced expression and said, "I'm fine." Suddenly, those moments felt heavier, filled with unspoken truths. I shifted forward in my chair, my curiosity overwhelming my fear. "What exactly are you suggesting I do?" He studied me for a long moment, his gaze unwavering yet unreadable. Then softly, start by noticing the small things. The hesitation before he speaks. The way he lingers in the garage at night. How his eyes shift when certain topics come up. Those small moments, that's where you'll find the truth. His voice had softened now, carrying something more than concern, something almost personal. And strangely, I felt it too, a connection forming fragile but undeniable. Before I could respond, a knock interrupted the moment. We both turned, but Mr. Whitmore didn't move to unlock the door. Instead, he glanced back at me with a faint, knowing smile. "Give me just a little more time," he murmured, as though some truths couldn't be rushed. The knock-faded footsteps retreating, leaving us wrapped once more in the silence of that office. And in that silence, I realized this wasn't only about Richard anymore. There was something deeper unfolding, something I hadn't dared to let myself feel in years. The only sound that lingered in the room was the rain, softer now, almost like it was pressing its ear against the glass to listen in. Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the polished wood of his desk. "I need to tell you something personal," he said, his tone careful, yet carrying an undercurrent I hadn't heard before. "Not as Richard's employer, but as someone who's been in your shoes." I tilted my head slightly, curiosity pulling me closer. "In my shoes," he nodded slowly. "My wife and we went through a time when silence grew louder than words. We lived in the same house, shared the same table, but it felt like oceans stretched between us. It wasn't until someone from the outside cared enough to point it out that I realized what we were losing. The way he said it wasn't rehearsed. It carried weight, raw and unpolished. Vulnerability from a man I'd only seen wrapped in authority. Something in me softened. Suddenly, he wasn't just my husband's boss. He was a man who understood the fractures that creep quietly into a marriage. "I don't want Richard to slip into that same silence," he continued, his voice low but steady. "And I don't want you left behind, wondering what went wrong." His gaze found mine, not searching, not demanding, but asking for trust. The steadiness in his eyes made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Heat bloomed on my cheeks, my breath catching as I clasped my hands together in my lap, trying to steady them. Almost instinctively, I glanced toward the door. The lock gleamed faintly under the light, a reminder that the world outside couldn't touch this moment. "You must think it's strange," I whispered, telling me all of this. A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe. But often the right thing feels strange at first." He rose then, moving toward the bookshelf. His fingers traced the spines of books until they paused at a small leather-bound journal. He opened it to a page marked by a ribbon, glanced briefly, then closed it again. "I keep notes," he said, placing it back reverently. "Not about work, about people, observations, reminders of what matters. I've written things about Richard here, things I think you should know. But they're not mine to hand over. You'll have to find them in him." The thought unsettled me, and yet comforted me at once. Knowing someone else had been watching Richard, guarding pieces of him I hadn't realized was slipping away. I'm telling you this because I believe you can reach him, Mr. Whitmore said, returning to his seat. But it won't be easy. You'll have to step into places he's hidden, and you'll need patience. His words weighed heavy, yet underneath them was something more, an awareness that this conversation was shaping more than just my marriage. You underestimate yourself, Eleanor, he added softly. You carry more presence than you realize. The room seemed to hold its breath. And for the first time, I wondered if this connection I felt with him was only about Richard, or if something else was unfolding quietly between us. The rain had stopped, leaving only silver traces against the glass. Afternoon sunlight slipped into the room, warm and golden, wrapping the space in an almost intimate glow. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The steady tick of a clock filled the silence, marking each second like a gentle reminder of how close we sat, sharing something that couldn't be undone. Finally, he broke the stillness. I hope you understand why I asked you here. Why I didn't want anyone else to overhear. I nodded slowly. I think I do. At least, most of it. His faint smile deepened. But in his eyes, I saw something more, a quiet recognition, as though he could sense the storm stirring inside me. Sometimes, he said gently, these conversations are less about answers and more about what they awaken. What struck me most, standing there in the quiet of his office, the door still locked, the hum of the outside world held at bay, was not only the questions about my husband, but the questions about myself, about the corners of me I had let grow silent over the years, the parts that had been waiting for something or someone to stir them awake. I rose from my chair slowly, uncertain if I was ready to leave or afraid of what it might mean to linger. Mr. Whitmore stood as well, crossing the short distance to the door. His hand rested on the lock for a moment, and before he turned it, he glanced back at me. Eleanor, he said, his voice low but steady. You have more influence than you realize. Use it gently. But don't be afraid to use it. There was no flourish, no dramatic pause. Just the simple click of the lock releasing and the quiet creak of the door as it opened. The air outside his office felt cooler, lighter, but also strangely distant, as if I had stepped out of one world and back into another. The receptionist lifted her head as I passed, offering me a polite smile. I returned it automatically, though my mind remained in that wood-paneled room, replaying the rhythm of his voice, the weight of his words. Driving home through the city, the lights blinked alive one by one against the deepening dusk. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, but my thoughts wandered to Richard, to the man I'd married, and to the man who had just spent nearly an hour speaking to me, as if I carried the key to something fragile and essential. When I pulled into our driveway, the warm glow of the living room lamp greeted me from the window. Richard was home. His silhouette moved gently across the room, so achingly familiar, and yet, in that moment, I felt a tenderness stir inside me, one I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what I was going to say to him, or if I would say anything at all. Maybe words weren't needed, not yet. But I would begin noticing the pauses, the silences between his sentences, the truths tucked quietly into his small gestures. And perhaps in choosing to notice, I would not only find a way to reach him, but rediscover the parts of myself that had been quietly waiting all along for someone to knock on their door. Dear friends, if it were you when you returned home after such a mysterious and emotional conversation, would you dare to confront and ask your partner right away? Or would you choose to stay silent, observe and wait, and tell me, where are you watching this story from? Is it dark where you live now, or is there still sunlight at the end of the day? Please share so we can connect in this space.